Rebecca Long-Bailey, hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Not too bad. How was yourself?
Yeah, good.
Good.
Let's talk about winning.
Yeah.
Tell me about something that you've won.
Won. Oh. I got a little a badge for doing gymnastics when I was little. I remember winning that. I won the election in Salford and Eccles in the general election, despite the devastating defeats that we'd seen across the country.
Mm. Tell me about your childhood more then. So gymnastics, what was it like growing up around here?
It was good. I mean, I lived in a place called Old Trafford till I was about 8 or 9, and it was a happy childhood. And we lived on one of those streets that all of the kids knew each other, and we used to play in the street, which you don't tend to get very often nowadays. And there was quite a big kind of community spirit on our road, and I remember that very vividly. But I also remember listening to what was happening to my dad at work. He was working for Shell at Barton Docks, and towards the end of the 1980s, Shell Barton Docks was closed down, and we had to move as a family, otherwise my father would have lost his job. And we moved to near to Ellesmere Port, where they opened a new factory where my dad got work there. And then throughout my childhood and my teenage years, I saw what was happening in many workplaces across the UK, where labour became very disposable. There were many redundancies, and my dad, as a trade union rep, had to try and fight for his colleagues and also fight against redundancy for him, and the worry that that placed on my family, and the fact that, you know, we'd lose our house after my parents working so hard to try and put a roof over our heads and to have a nice life. It was quite a realisation of what the world was like and what the economy could do to you, and how you could be up one day and then completely on your knees the next.
People spoke a lot around the election in the aftermath of it about the gap, the bubble, if you like, between London and places like Manchester, basically the rest of the country. I wonder if you could perhaps draw on some of the differences perhaps between a place like Salford and a place like London.
Well, growing up, and certainly still now within the community, many people don't feel as if Westminster is for them. And it seems very alien, and that certainly happened not just politically, but both politically and in the economy. A lot of our wealth was channelled towards London and the South East, whilst many areas across the North and Midlands and beyond were deindustrialised. And we were all told in the 80s that it was going to be all right, that wealth was going to trickle down and we'd all have a slice of the pie, and that didn't happen. So certainly the anger that we saw throughout the whole Brexit referendum, and indeed the general election, where people felt that they didn't have control over their lives and that their areas weren't invested in for many years, that didn't happen overnight. That was a long-term 40-year project, unfortunately, that had happened. And the only way to change that is to reset the economy, and it's also to talk about power and where power lies. And I don't think that power should be centralised in Westminster. I think we need to see a seismic shift in our constitutional processes and the way that power is distributed across the United Kingdom. And I've talked already about scrapping the House of Lords and replacing it with a form of elected Senate, which will be outside of London, and it will be representative of people right across the UK. And it would also have a purpose of assessing any government legislation against key indicators: our health, our well-being, our happiness, and the contribution to the overall economy. Because for me, and I think for many people across the UK, the whole role of government is to keep us safe, yes, but it's also to improve our lives. So government should be there for the betterment of the people, and at the moment it's not, and I think many people are losing faith in the political establishment as a result.
Do you like being in London? Do you like going to Westminster and sort of outside of, I'm sure you enjoy representing your constituency and all the rest of it, but beyond the political side of things, do you enjoy visiting London and spending time there?
I don't want to offend any Londoners, but no, not really. I mean, to be fair, I've never really been around London, apart from I've got relatives down there, so we've visited relatives, and I've also been doing it for work. I didn't spend a lot of time in London before I was an MP, and very much my weekly commute takes me from Salford to Manchester Piccadilly train station, straight into London, on the tube to Westminster, back to the flat late of an evening, and then back into Westminster, and then back up to Piccadilly and Salford again. So I don't really see that much of London, but I've heard that there's lots of nice little villages where you can get really tasty food, so I need to check stuff out one day.
Check some of them, get outside of Westminster a little bit. You know, people have said a lot about the need for there to be a frank and honest conversation about what happened after the election. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you think went wrong during that process. What did Labour do incorrectly that led to the result that happened?
It was absolutely devastating, and I think many people, not just Labour members and Labour MPs, I think many within our communities who wanted to see a Labour government are going through a bit of a grieving process at the moment, and the excitement of the policies in the manifesto that were answering the big questions, the economic questions that needed to be answered. I think many people felt that their beliefs and their hope had been invalidated. And I think it's important to recognise that the reasons that we lost weren't just because of one thing. It wasn't just a Brexit election, although I think our position on Brexit did create a level of mistrust, because certainly when I was knocking on a door and a Remainer answered, they thought we were a Brexit party. And when I was speaking to a Leaver, they thought we were trying to overturn the result of the referendum. So we were trying to unify and bring communities together, but that unfortunately wasn't happening, and the message that we were trying to put forward just wasn't resonating with people. So Brexit was a huge issue. I also don't think we were trusted on anti-Semitism and being able to tackle that within our party, despite taking action throughout the NEC and under our new General Secretary. We still hadn't rebuilt that trust with the Jewish community and the wider population as to us being serious about really getting to grips with that. And then the final point is about having a message and a narrative that really resonates with people. And we didn't have an overarching message that told people that everything in our manifesto was to help them realise their aspiration, whether you were a business, whether you were an individual. Our job was to make your life better. And we sometimes got a bit overloaded with the minutiae of specific policies and making the point that we were helping the most vulnerable, which we should, by the way, because we're the Labour Party and you expect us to do that. But we didn't balance that with the overarching message, was that we were about aspiration and realising aspiration.
When the exit poll dropped, what was your immediate emotional reaction? How did you feel?
I was in a state of shock, and I was in the kitchen of my house with my mum and dad, who were going to look after my little boy while me and my husband went to the count later that night. And my mum burst into tears, and my dad, who doesn't cry, was kind of trying not to cry. And my mum was just saying, that's it, that's everyone's hope gone. And I was just, I realised then that, you know, everyone has quite strong principles and they have a vision about what society should look like. And we all believed, you know, right across our Labour Party, and our supporters believed that we were really working towards something. We were trying to create that fairer, more equal society. We were going to tackle climate change and turn it into a huge opportunity to democratise our economy. And that seemed to have just fell through our fingers in that few seconds of that exit poll. So I was absolutely devastated, and at the time I was thinking, how do we come back from this? How do we prove to people that your principles were the right principles? And we can have that. You should never ever lose sight of that hope, and you should always believe that you deserve the best and never let anybody tell you otherwise. So we've got a long path now to power, but we need to start now, and it's about reaching out to our communities, building up that movement through the grassroots, having a visible presence right across our communities, whether it's trade unionists, whether it's Labour members, whether it's just general people who believe in that future and that hope. We've got to be out there demanding that and making sure that in 4 years' time we have that economy and we have that society.
I wonder if there was perhaps a tinge of anger when that result came through, because the things you've just outlined to me about failing to handle anti-Semitism, a Brexit policy that left voting on the doorstep confused, you know, they're sort of things that can be traced back to the leader's office. And I wonder how much blame or how disappointed you are with how Jeremy Corbyn handled the campaign.
I don't think Jeremy could have done any more than he did. I mean, he put his all into this. And, you know, I supported him from the start because he was a principled, honest, decent, kind man. But we did get things wrong, and it wasn't just Jeremy, it was everybody around, you know, the whole kind of operation, the shadow cabinet. We all have to take responsibility for what happened in that general election, and we've got to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes again, because it isn't what we believed in that was wrong, but we really didn't convince our voters that what we believed in was going to make their lives better.
So is there anything that you would blame the leadership office or Jeremy specifically with? Is there anything you would directly say, you know, he's got that wrong, that's something that meant we had this result, the worst election defeat since 1935?
Well, the point I made about the campaign message, and the sad thing about politics is that you can have the greatest policies in the world, but it's 99% ground war and 1% policy. And if you haven't got a decent ground war in operation at the time of a general election, you're not going to win. So the Conservatives won with a slogan, "Get Brexit done." And that emerged even when Boris Johnson was going through his own leadership campaign, never mind the general election. So it was already filtering down through the media into our communities, and people were saying it, "Get Brexit done, get Brexit done." And it resonated, and we didn't have that message. We couldn't package everything that we believed in, all the great policies, into one message that said, look, we're about aspiration. If you're aspirational, we'll help you achieve that. And that's what we should have done. And it needs to start at the beginning now, not in 4 years' time, because we need to have discipline to make sure that the message that we're trying to send out into our community starts to resonate at an early stage. And then we can start filling in the gaps on policy and say, well, actually, this is how we're going to help you realise this.
There's a lot of that I want to get into, but something that I think you touched on your previous answer was that you said that you think Jeremy is a kind, nice man, versus Boris Johnson, who I think by a lot of accounts is perhaps not so much of a kind and nice man, to put it politely. You're talking about dealing with a Tory party that deals in untruth a lot of the time. And I wonder, this is a point actually that the rapper drill minister made to me on election night, was that Labour basically needs someone who can be nastier than the nasty party, who can take the fight to them and is prepared to roll up their sleeves, get a little bit dirty and take them on and beat them at their own game. Do you think you're nasty enough to beat Boris Johnson?
I'm robust, I'm angry, and I'll pick a fight with anyone. But I don't think we need to be Machiavellian, quite frankly, because I don't think our voters want us to observe the dark arts and perform dark arts, because they want to know that their Prime Minister is an honest, decent person who wants to make their lives better, not their own lives better. So I agree that we need to be more ferocious in the way that we tackle the untruths and the skewed media reports and the smears. And that's why I've been talking about having a very comprehensive rebuttal organisation within the Labour Party to deal with smears and respond quickly, and to try and head off many of these things that will essentially form the basis of the image of whoever our leader's going to be, whether that's me or whether that's one of the other candidates. And you have to define that image. You can't let the media do it for you. And unfortunately, that's what happened to the Labour Party, certainly over the last 4 years. And it was very difficult to counteract against that if you don't start off doing that and being more ferocious.
Something you touched on in your previous answer also was sort of creating that sort of almost pride in the country, the broader sort of support. You've written before about progressive patriotism. I wonder what it is that you are most proud of about Britain. What are you proudest of about this country?
God, it was a huge long list. I mean, I remember watching the Olympics that year when they had that, I call it the NHS dance, you know, when they had the NHS beds and they were kind of going round on the pitch. And I had a lump in my throat, so I was like, wow, you know, that's Britain, that's what we do, that's what we represent to the world. And we represent fairness, we represent equality, we represent the rule of law, and we also represent industry and pride and diversity, and that's fantastic. And the point that I was trying to make when I wrote my article in The Guardian over Christmas, I know many people didn't like the choice of words, and I accept the comments and the criticisms, but what I meant was that people have an inherent sense of pride. They've got pride in where they live, whether you're in Manchester and you've got the Manchester Bee, Liver and the Liver Birds, the Birmingham Bull, you know, we've all got pride. Salford, you know, there's the proud city of Salford, and we do feel proud of where we're from, and we're proud of the diversity of our communities, and we've got to make sure that that pride is channeled in a positive way so that we can be proud. And the Green Industrial Revolution that I worked on, and it was a huge part of our manifesto but really didn't get out in the election campaign, if I'm honest, that really targeted that sense of pride, that building the industries of the future in our communities that would have a positive effect on the whole world. and that our people would have the best possible jobs that they could. Their homes would be insulated to the highest standard and have the technologies of the future. And that's what made me proud of my community and of my country, because I thought this is what we're going to do for the world. And it would have brought people together, whether it was cities or towns, young and old. And that's why we need to target that sort of pride.
Something else that you mentioned, you've said before, I think you wrote in Tribune when you were sort of your soft launch of your candidacy, if you like, was that you had a key role in not just supporting these policies but writing them. For example, Green Industrial Revolution. I've, during the course of this interview, asked, sort of provide you with an opportunity to maybe criticise Jeremy Corbyn a little bit. You didn't go particularly hard on him. I'm wondering if it would be fair to describe you as a continuity candidate after Jeremy's left, and if that's the case and you would accept that perhaps you are, should the Labour Party want a continuity candidate after it's received its biggest electoral loss since 1935?
Well, I'm nobody's continuity candidate. And the reason I supported Jeremy all those years ago was because he believed in many of the same things that I believed in. And that was the kind of politics that I wanted to see within our party. And many of our members do, many of our MPs do. So if it's in terms of, am I going to change my principles and become different? No. I'm quite solid in terms of what I believe and what I want our nation and our regions and nations to become in the future. But in terms of being the same person, no. Jeremy and myself are very, very different people, obviously. I'm northern for a start, Jeremy's a southerner. But yeah, there's a number of differences
There's
between
a bit of disdain in your voice there, Becky, as you said that about him there, perhaps. Let's talk. Okay, somewhere else that Labour's policy has shifted, right, is on Brexit, the European Union. I wanted to know what your policy would be regards to the European Union. If you were successful, got a Labour government, would you look to rejoin? Have you accepted now that that battle's done? Are we off? Because if that's the case, and what you're saying about, you know, your principles remain the same, you won't change them, we're then looking at, you know, you voted to remain in the referendum, you then come on to a second referendum policy, and then we're back to, we're leaving, it's over, it's done. Is there a bit of a contradiction there between what you're saying about how you won't change your principles?
Not at all, no. I mean, when the referendum happened, obviously I was devastated because I wanted to stay in the European Union, but I accepted the results, and I came from a Leave constituency, and I wanted us to get a good deal and to get on with it. And then it became very clear that, you know, discussions in our party mirrored what was happening in our communities. There were very many people who were angry and they wanted us to remain. There were many people who were angry and wanted us to leave without a deal. And then there were many people in the middle who just wanted us to get on with it and get a good deal and then try to move on to important things. Now, what we tried to do as a party, and at the start when people were talking about people's votes, I was very apprehensive because I felt that that looked like an undermining of democracy. And then when I realised that there would be no resolution, there was no compromise that would suit anybody, the only way we could bring our communities together would be to get that deal, which is what I wanted to do from the outset, and then to put that to a confirmatory vote. Now, unfortunately, many of our communities saw that as a fudge, they saw it as a compromise, and they weren't happy with it, and I think we've got to be honest about that. And in terms of what happens next, frankly, our job and my job as Labour leader will be to hold the government to account on the deal that they get with the European Union now that we are leaving, the final trade deal. And then it will be to build a vision of what Britain looks like after Brexit so that we can start talking about resetting and democratising our economy, about making sure that we're shifting wealth and power to those who need it within our communities, and to make sure that our constitutional frameworks aren't centred around London and they actually work for our communities and are democratically accountable to our communities, and also making sure that our public services are supported and are fit for purpose for the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's our job now. I don't think we'll win any support from our communities rehearsing the arguments of the last 4 years. We've got to get on and show people what the future is going to look like under Labour.
Is that, if you do that and you accept that, you know, these arguments have been made, we've lost the argument, are you accepting then sort of, you know, loss to this, what is, I would probably describe Brexit as a project of the right, as a project of the Tory party? You know, are you conceding to defeat to them if you're prepared to accept that this is happening and that we're leaving? Have they got the better of you?
Not at all, but we lost the general election, unfortunately, and the Conservatives have one of the biggest majorities that they've had in a long time. And our job now is to hold them to account. We want to have a close relationship after we've left the European Union. We want to be able to trade with countries in the European Union, because we know that if we can't and there's any impediment or barriers to trade, then many of our industries here will suffer considerably. So our job is to keep scrutiny on the government and to make sure that they do push that deal in the direction that it needs to go. Now, obviously, they're not going to go as far as we would like them to, and we thought from the start that they were going to use this as an opportunity to water down workers' rights and regulations, etc., etc. So, of course, when we're in power, when we win, and I'm the Prime Minister, we'll have to assess the deal and revisit where we can to ensure that we are providing the best outcome for our economy. But in terms of arguing to rejoin at this stage, I don't think that would be right. I think we need to start showing our voters what kind of economy we're going to have here after Brexit and how we'll improve their lives.
One of the most striking things I thought about the Tory victory was the fact that they did it basically without Scotland. You know, even when you're talking about Thatcher at the height of her powers, still maybe 10, 13-ish seats up there in Scotland. Now, very, very few. It's basically they've got that majority with England and Wales. And that's also a reality for the Labour Party, to win an election and potentially to have to do it without Scotland. And I don't mean that in the sense of not as part of the United Kingdom, I mean, without the prospect of gaining seats there. If you become the Labour leader, what are you going to do to redress that balance? How are you going to try and take back those seats that the SNP has basically got a monopoly on now?
Yeah, I mean, the Scotland issue didn't happen overnight, and that's something that has to be acknowledged by our party. And we've got to build, and we've got to build very, very quickly. There are a number of issues that can be used to rebuild that faith with Scottish voters. Industrial strategy is one of them, and our Green Industrial Revolution, and about making sure that industries in Scotland are supported and we're showing a vision of the future for them, whether it's oil workers who potentially may lose their jobs in decades to come because of the decline in production of North Sea oil, whether it's transitioning to renewable technologies in other areas of Scotland. We've got to show what our industries are going to be. The second issue is about making sure that we have a constitutional framework that ensures that the people of Scotland, and indeed the people of Wales, have faith that they are independent constitutionally and have the powers that they should. And that extends to political power and economic power. And unfortunately, the situation at the moment is that although we have Welsh governments and we have Scottish governments, they're very much seen in a hierarchy where the government in Westminster is seen as the king at the top of the tree and they're satellites on the outside. And that was never the intention. It should be a true collaboration. And that's why I'll be looking very closely at work that's being done by my Scottish colleagues on constitutional reform, particularly with reference to federalism and what we can do to support those governments to help them feel that they do have the economic power that they should do.
Do you think if Ian Murray, Labour's only Scottish MP, was to be the deputy leader, that might be a right step in the direction to sort of try and gesture that your Labour Party is serious about taking Scotland back?
Well, it's up to the members to determine who they want the deputy leader and the leader to be. But obviously I'm backing Angela Rayner for deputy leader. I think we need to ensure that we have representatives that will fight for Scotland within our cabinet, on our shadow cabinet. That's a definite certainty. But we also need to make sure that it's not just a symbolic appointment, that we've actually got a plan to back this up. And it's not just about one Scottish MP in Westminster. This is about the whole Scottish Labour Party and making sure that we're working in collaboration with them and not treating them as a satellite organisation. Every decision that we make and every policy that we roll out should be considered in terms of how it benefits Scotland and how it benefits Wales. And all of the work done by our Labour colleagues in Scotland and Wales equally should be fed through to us so that we can support what they're doing, make sure that we mention it in the media and make sure that we start building up that collaborative narrative instead of looking as if we're all working in silos.
If you could implement one policy, you're Prime Minister, you've got a magic wand, there's no implementation period, none of that, it's there, you've got it. And it doesn't have to be one from the Labour Party manifesto that from 2019. If you could implement anything, what would it be? Green
Industrial Revolution, because I think that is our biggest tool to tackle climate change and to deliver economic change right across the UK.
Do you think people missed the importance of the climate in the election that we've just had? Do you think it was taken seriously enough?
They did, and that was really sad because it formed a huge part of our manifesto, and I'd done a lot of work beforehand, travelling the length and breadth of the country, speaking to activists, trade unions, businesses, working with academics and engineers to develop our plans so that we weren't just talking about a Green New Deal. We actually had a comprehensive, detailed plan that showed what industries we needed, what levels of spending were required, where certain industries were going to be located, how many jobs were going to be created, and how quickly we would be able to roll this out. And I thought it was really, really exciting. And unfortunately, we didn't encapsulate that in our election message and show that, you know, yeah, you're angry about Brexit, yeah, you're angry about lack of investment, but look, this won't just make your world better for your children and grandchildren, but it's going to give them good jobs. It's going to give them hope, it's going to give them security, and it's going to give you a life, a luxury in your home that you haven't seen in a generation, usher in a new era of public luxury, I said in my conference speech, because that's what we should aspire to. Our economy is there to improve our living standards year on year, decade on decade. It's not something that should be done to us, it's something that should work for us, and the Green Industrial Revolution was right at the heart of that.
I wonder if you could speak to that little girl that we were talking about earlier who grew up in Salford, was in Manchester, and with the hindsight of knowing that you're proposing this, you know, transforming essentially not just our politics but like the country's entire economic system. I wonder what it is that you would say to that younger version of yourself.
I'd say keep your dreams. No, don't ever lose your dreams, and don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't get them. My life has been littered with people telling me that I can't do this and I can't do that, and I just tell them to, and I do it.
It's the end of a decade, start of a new one. I wonder if we could perhaps reflect a little bit on the last 10 years gone by. I wonder what it is that you're proudest of, something that you've achieved in the last 10 years. What's been one of the biggest moments for you?
My child, my little boy, who I call the king, is my greatest achievement in life.
Any similarity to Boris Johnson wanting to be king of the world when he was a little boy there, perhaps? No? Similarities there?
No, because obviously I'm kind of like creating a new generation of socialists there.
Yeah, got you.
Hopefully he won't go the other way when he grows up.
What about biggest regret? Something that you regret from the last 10 years?
Oh, that's a good one. Biggest regret. I don't have any regrets really. It's like that song, you know, the Frank Sinatra. Well, he had a few regrets, didn't he? Regrets, yeah. I had a few. Yeah. No, I can't really think of one off the top of my head, really. I think sometimes, I mean, one of my flaws, but also positive attributes, is that people often say I'm quiet, but I don't like to say things for the sake of saying things. My mum's always said empty vessels make the most noise. So I thought there's no point saying something until you've got something important to say. So maybe I should have been a little bit more shouty in certain situations. But I equally, you know, there's no point shouting if you're just going to embarrass yourself. So I think you need to pick your times, say the pertinent things, and change the world. I
wonder if there's, you're sort of talking about something in a veiled way there, a moment where you could have spoken up for something and you didn't. What were you sort of referring to there? Are you talking in generalities, or is there a certain time where you're thinking, I would have liked to have spoken up about something?
Not really, no. I mean, there are times sometimes when everyone likes to have discussions about things in politics, as you know, and sometimes you go to meetings and a lot of people will say the same things over and over and over again, and it doesn't add to the debate. So sometimes people wouldn't have understood what my position was on things because maybe I wouldn't say anything because I think, well, there's no point saying that because everyone else has already said it already. It's only when I had something extra to add and something to contribute that I'd be like, right, that's it. I need to tell everybody how things need to be done. And there we go.
You're a Manchester United fan, is that right?
I am.
I wonder if you think there are any similarities between, if any, between Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Jeremy Corbyn.
That's a random question.
It is a random question. Yeah. We're getting to that time. It's the end of the interview, so now I'm just throwing them at you. I wonder.
I don't know. I mean, I can't even answer that.
Okay, sure. And just finally, and this is a tricky one, have you ever taken illegal drugs?
Oh, well, I've been to Amsterdam. That's
okay,
all I'll say.
That's implied. Rebecca Longbailey, thank
Thanks,
you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers.